Bear cub trapped in a butterfly dome and took it to hospital. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the quiet neighborhood of Willowbrook. Birds chirped softly in the distance, while a gentle breeze rustled through the maple trees. In the backyard of a small cottage, 18-month-old Zara Brooks sat on a colorful blanket, her tiny fingers wrapped around wooden blocks. Her mother, Nina Brooks, was inside preparing breakfast, the smell of fresh pancakes drifting through the open kitchen window. Zara babbled to herself, stacking blocks in wobbly towers that toppled over with delighted giggles. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she noticed something moving beyond the garden fence. A butterfly dome stood at the far end of their yard, a beautiful, netted enclosure that Nina had built to attract butterflies. The structure was about 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide, filled with flowering plants that bloomed in vibrant colors. Inside the dome, monarch butterflies danced gracefully from flower to flower. Zara clapped her hands, watching their orange and black wings flutter in the morning light. She had always been fascinated by these delicate creatures, often crawling toward the dome to press her face against the netting. But this morning was different. Something else had caught her attention. At the edge of the nearby forest, a small brown bear cub emerged from behind a cluster of pine trees. The cub was no bigger than a medium-sized dog, with soft fur that glistened in the sunlight. Its dark eyes darted nervously as it sniffed the air, searching for something. The little bear had been separated from its mother during the night, wandering aimlessly through the woods in search of food and comfort. The sweet scent of berries growing near the butterfly dome drew the cub closer to the human dwelling. Its tiny paws padded silently across the grass as it approached the backyard. The cub had never encountered humans before, but hunger overrode its natural caution. Zara watched in wonder as the small bear appeared at the edge of their property. Instead of fear, her innocent mind registered only curiosity. She had seen bears in her picture books, but never a real one. The cub looked so small and lost, just like the stuffed animals she hugged at bedtime. The bear cub reached the butterfly dome and stood on its hind legs, trying to reach the berry bushes planted just inside the netting. Its claws caught in the mesh as it stretched upward, desperate for food. The more it struggled, the more entangled it became. Within moments, the cub's front paws were hopelessly twisted in the netting. Panic set in as the young bear thrashed wildly, trying to free itself. The butterfly dome shook violently with each desperate movement, frightening the butterflies inside. They scattered in all directions, their delicate wings beating frantically against the walls of their enclosure. The cub's frightened whimpers echoed across the quiet morning air. Its struggles only made the situation worse, tightening the net around its paws and chest. The bear was now completely trapped, suspended partially in the air by the twisted mesh. Zara dropped her wooden blocks and crawled toward the commotion. Her mother's voice called from the kitchen, but the toddler was transfixed by the bear's plight. She had never heard such sounds of distress before, and something deep inside her tiny heart stirred with compassion. The cub's cries grew weaker as exhaustion began to set in. Its small body trembled with fear and fatigue. The morning sun beat down on its dark fur, making the situation even more uncomfortable. Time was running out for the trapped animal. From her spot on the blanket, Zara could see the bear's frightened eyes. They seemed to look directly at her, pleading for help that only she could provide. The connection between the innocent child and the helpless cub was instant and profound. Nina's footsteps could be heard inside the house, moving from room to room as she searched for her daughter. "Zara, where did you go, sweetheart?" Her voice carried through the open windows. But Zara was already on a mission. She began crawling across the grass toward the butterfly dome, drawn by an instinct she couldn't understand. Her tiny hands pushed against the ground as she moved forward, determined to reach the struggling bear cub. The morning air was still and quiet except for the soft whimpers coming from the trapped animal. No neighbors were outside yet, and no one else had witnessed the extraordinary scene unfolding in the Brooks family backyard. As Zara drew closer to the dome, she could see the fear in the cub's dark eyes. The bear had stopped thrashing and now hung limply in the netting, its energy nearly depleted. The sight of the approaching human child seemed to calm the animal slightly, as if it sensed that a help might finally be coming. The butterflies inside the dome had settled on the far side, away from the commotion. Their colorful wings created a beautiful backdrop to the unfolding drama, nature's beauty contrasting sharply with the urgent situation at hand. Zara reached the edge of the butterfly dome and pulled herself up to a standing position, using the wooden frame for support. Her small fingers wrapped around the netting as she looked up at the trapped bear cub. The animal was so close she could see its individual whiskers and the way its chest rose and fell with each labored breath. For a moment, child and cub stared at each other through the mesh. Two innocent beings, one human and one wild, connected by a thread of understanding that transcended species. The bear's whimpering had stopped, replaced by curious snuffling sounds as it studied the small human who had come to investigate. What happened next would change everything, though neither Zara nor the trapped cub could have imagined the extraordinary chain of events that was about to unfold. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting longer shadows across the backyard where an impossible friendship was about to begin. Zara pressed her tiny palms against the netting, her breath fogging the mesh as she leaned closer to the bear cub. The animal's eyes, wide with exhaustion and fear, seemed to focus on her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding that neither could put into words. The cub's breathing had calmed, though its small body still trembled from the strain of being suspended in the tangled net. "Mama," Zara whispered, though her voice was too soft to carry back to the house. She had learned only a handful of words, but somehow she knew this creature needed help. Her chubby fingers found a loose section of netting near the cub's right paw. Without thinking, she began to tug at it with the determined persistence only toddlers possess. The bear cub felt the pressure around its paw lessen slightly. It let out a soft grunt, not of pain, but of something that almost sounded like gratitude. Zara giggled at the sound, recognizing it as similar to the noises her stuffed animals made when she squeezed them during playtime. Inside the house, Nina finished setting the breakfast table and looked out the kitchen window to check on her daughter. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Her 18-month-old baby was standing at the butterfly dome, face to face with what appeared to be a wild animal. "Oh my God!" Nina breathed, her hands flying to her mouth. She dropped the plate she was holding and it shattered on the kitchen floor with a loud crash. Her first instinct was to scream, to run outside and snatch her daughter away from danger. But something held her back. The scene looked almost peaceful, despite its impossibility. Nina crept toward the back door, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the glass, she could see Zara's small hands working at the netting while the bear hung motionless, watching her daughter with what looked like patience rather than aggression. The realization that her baby was trying to help the trapped animal hit her like a physical blow. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, unsure whether to call 911 or animal control first. But as she dialed, she kept her eyes fixed on the extraordinary scene unfolding in her backyard. Zara had managed to loosen one section of the net, and the cub's right paw was now free. The bear flexed its tiny claws, testing its newfound mobility. The call connected, and a dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's a bear, Nina whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might startle the animals and break whatever spell was keeping her daughter safe. A baby bear trapped in my backyard. My daughter she's trying to help it. Ma'am, I need you to get your child away from the animal immediately, the dispatcher said urgently. We're sending units to your location now. But Nina couldn't move. Something about the scene held her captive. The bear cub had begun making soft chittering sounds, almost as if it was talking to Zara. Her daughter responded with her own babbling, creating an impossible conversation between species. Zara had moved to work on another section of netting near the cub's left paw. Her tiny fingers were surprisingly deft as she pulled and twisted the mesh. The bear remained perfectly still, as if it understood that any sudden movement might frighten the little human who was trying to help. Across the street, old Mr. Peterson was watering his garden when he noticed the commotion in the Brooks' backyard. At 78 years old, he had seen many things in his lifetime, but nothing quite like this. He set down his watering can and walked to his fence for a better look. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered under his breath. The sight of little Zara working to free the bear cub with such determination brought tears to his eyes. He had watched the Brooks family move into the neighborhood 2 years ago, had seen Nina struggle as a single mother after her husband deployed overseas with the military. The little girl had always struck him as special, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Mr. Peterson pulled out his own phone and began recording, instinctively knowing that what he was witnessing needed to be preserved. The morning light created a halo effect around Zara as she worked, her blonde curls catching the sun while she concentrated on her task. The bear cub's left paw came free with a sudden pop that made both Zara and the animal jump slightly. The cub was now hanging by just its chest and back legs, but it had enough mobility to help in its own rescue. It began to carefully shift its weight, working with Zara rather than against the netting. Nina watched in amazement as her daughter and the bear cub seemed to coordinate their efforts. Zara would loosen a section of net, and the cub would carefully extract itself from that area before moving to help with the next tangle. It was as if they had been working together for years rather than minutes. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Nina knew that once the authorities arrived, this magical moment would be shattered by protocol and procedure. Animal control would tranquilize the cub, Zara would be pulled away, and the extraordinary bond forming between them would be broken. But for now, in these precious minutes before the outside world intervened, mother and daughter were part of something truly miraculous. The bear cub had managed to get its back legs free and was now supporting most of its own weight. Only a few stubborn tangles around its midsection kept it trapped. Zara reached up as high as her small arms would allow, her fingers working at a particularly tight knot. The bear cub lowered its head, bringing its face closer to hers. For a heart-stopping moment, Nina thought the animal might bite her daughter. Instead, the cub gently nuzzled Zara's hair with its snout, a gesture so tender it brought fresh tears to the watching mother's eyes. "Gentle," Zara whispered, one of the few words she knew clearly. She patted the cub's furry head with one hand while continuing to work on the netting with the other. The bear made a rumbling sound deep in its throat, not threatening but almost purring, like a very large cat. Mr. Peterson's hands shook as he held his phone, capturing every moment of the unprecedented interaction. He had lived through wars, raised 5 children, and buried a beloved wife, but nothing had moved him quite like watching this tiny human show such fearless compassion to a wild creature. The sirens were getting louder now, and Nina could hear vehicles turning onto their street. She made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of going outside to hurry the rescue along, she stayed at the window, guarding this moment between her daughter and the bear cub. Some things, she realized, were too sacred to interrupt. Zara had made significant progress. The bear cub was almost completely free, held now by just one stubborn section of netting that had wound itself around the animal's chest. Both child and cub were breathing hard from their efforts, but neither showed any sign of giving up. The cub began to twist its body in a slow, careful motion, working with the rhythm that Zara had established. As it turned, the final piece of netting began to unwind. The little girl clapped her hands in delight as she saw the bear getting closer to freedom. But just as success seemed within reach, something unexpected happened. The bear cub, in its excitement at nearly being free, let out a loud, joyful bark. The sound carried across the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot, alerting every person within 3 blocks that something extraordinary was happening in the Brooks family backyard. Windows began opening up and down the street. Curious neighbors stepped onto their porches and front lawns, shading their eyes against the morning sun as they tried to see what was causing all the commotion. The peaceful, private moment between Zara and the cub was about to become very public indeed. Mrs. Chen from next door gasped when she saw the scene, immediately calling to her husband, "Henry, come quick, there's a bear in the Brooks yard." The Hendersons from across the street came running, still in their bathrobes and slippers. Young Tommy Martinez, who delivered newspapers on his bicycle, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw little Zara working alongside the trapped bear cub. A crowd began to form along the street, everyone keeping their distance but unable to look away from the impossible sight. Phones appeared in dozens of hands as neighbors began recording and taking pictures. The story of the toddler and the bear cub was about to spread far beyond their quiet neighborhood. The sirens reached their street just as Zara managed to free the final section of netting. The bear cub dropped to the ground with a soft thud, landing on its paws inside the butterfly dome. For a moment, both child and animal stood perfectly still, as if neither could believe what they had just accomplished together. The cub shook itself vigorously, dislodging bits of torn netting from its fur. It looked up at Zara through the mesh, its dark eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. The little girl pressed her face against the netting again, and the bear cub reached up with one paw to touch the spot where her nose pressed through the mesh. 3 police cars and an animal control van pulled up in front of the house, their flashing lights painting the morning scene in alternating colors of red and blue. Officers jumped out of their vehicles, hands resting on their equipment as they assessed the situation. But what they found was not the dangerous emergency they had expected. Instead, they discovered a crowd of neighbors watching in reverent silence as a toddler and a bear cub shared what appeared to be a moment of profound connection through the walls of a butterfly dome. Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the force, had responded to countless animal calls over his career. He had never seen anything quite like this. The bear cub showed no signs of aggression, and the little girl seemed completely unafraid. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he never would have believed it possible. Dr. Sarah Kim from the County Animal Control stepped out of her van, tranquilizer gun in hand. She had been prepared for a standard bear relocation, but the scene before her gave her pause. The cub appeared healthy and uninjured, and its behavior was completely at odds with what she would expect from a frightened wild animal. Nina finally emerged from her house, moving slowly so as not to startle anyone involved in the delicate situation. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was one of wonder rather than fear. "Please," she said quietly to Officer Martinez. "Don't hurt it. My daughter, she saved it." The officer nodded. his own voice thick with emotion. "Ma'am, we're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to make sure everyone stays safe." Dr. Kim approached the butterfly dome carefully, her trained eye taking in every detail of the situation. The bear cub was clearly young, probably no more than 4 or 5 months old. It showed no signs of illness or injury, and its behavior suggested it was not rabid or otherwise dangerous. "Where's the mother?" she asked quietly. It was a question that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Everyone knew that bear cubs this young were rarely far from their mothers, and a protective sow could turn this miraculous scene into a tragedy in seconds. As if summoned by the very mention of her existence, a low growl rumbled from the edge of the forest. Every head turned toward the tree line, where a massive brown shape was emerging from the shadows. The mother bear had arrived, and she was looking for her baby. The crowd of neighbors instinctively stepped back, some retreating to their porches while others ducked behind parked cars. Officer Martinez immediately reached for his radio, calling for backup while Dr. Kim raised her tranquilizer gun with practiced precision. The peaceful morning scene had transformed into something far more dangerous in the span of seconds. But the most remarkable thing happened next. Instead of charging toward the crowd of humans, the mother bear stopped at the edge of the property line. Her massive head swiveled as she took in the scene, her dark eyes moving from the police officers to the gathered neighbors, and finally settling on the butterfly dome where her cub stood safely inside. The baby bear let out a series of excited chirps when it saw its mother. The sound was pure joy, the relief of a lost child finally reunited with its parent. The mother bear responded with a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath everyone's feet. Zara, still standing at the butterfly dome, turned to look at the enormous bear. Where any other child might have screamed and run, she simply waved her tiny hand and said, "Hi, Mama Bear." Nina's heart nearly stopped beating. Her daughter was greeting a 400-pound wild animal as if it were a neighbor stopping by for coffee. She took a step forward, ready to snatch Zara away, but Officer Martinez gently caught her arm. "Don't move too quickly," he whispered. "Let's see what happens." The mother bear began walking slowly toward the butterfly dome, but her movements were careful and deliberate rather than aggressive. She seemed to understand that the humans had helped her cub, not harmed it. With each step, her massive paws left deep impressions in the soft grass. Dr. Kim kept her tranquilizer gun trained on the approaching bear, but something in the animal's behavior made her hesitate. In her 15 years of wildlife management, she had never seen a mother bear approach humans with such apparent calm, especially when her cub was involved. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the mother bear reached the butterfly dome. She sniffed around the base of the structure, taking in the scents of her cub and the humans who had been nearby. Her investigation was thorough but gentle, like a detective gathering evidence at a crime scene. Inside the dome, the bear cub pressed itself against the netting where its mother's nose appeared. The reunion between mother and baby was tender, filled with soft grunts and gentle nuzzling through the mesh. Zara giggled at the sounds, clapping her hands as she watched the bears communicate. "She's thanking us," whispered Mrs. Chen from her position behind an oak tree. "Look at her eyes. She knows we helped her baby." It was true. The mother bear's gaze moved from her cub to Zara, and something passed between them that transcended the barrier between human and animal. The massive creature lowered her head slightly, in what could only be described as a bow of acknowledgement. But the peaceful moment was shattered by an unexpected sound. Mr. Henderson's ancient pickup truck backfired as he tried to start it, creating a noise like a gunshot that echoed across the neighborhood. The mother bear's head snapped up, her ears flattening against her skull, as every muscle in her powerful body tensed. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see if the startling noise would trigger the bear's fight-or-flight instincts. Dr. Kim's finger tightened on the trigger of her tranquilizer gun, ready to act if the situation turned dangerous. Instead of attacking or fleeing, the mother bear did something that left everyone speechless. She positioned herself between the crowd and the butterfly dome, creating a protective barrier around her cub and the little girl who had helped free it. Her stance was alert but not aggressive, like a bodyguard rather than a threat. Zara seemed oblivious to the tension in the air. She had found a small gap in the netting and was poking her finger through it, trying to touch the bear cub's paw. The young bear responded by pressing its own paw against the mesh, creating a moment of contact that brought tears to many of the watching adults. "We need to get that cub out of the dome," Dr. Kim said quietly to Officer Martinez. "The longer this goes on, the more unpredictable the situation becomes. But how do you safely remove a bear cub from an enclosure when its protective mother is standing guard just feet away? And how do you separate a toddler from what appeared to be the first real friendship she had ever made with another living creature?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Old Mr. Peterson, who had been recording the entire encounter on his phone, slowly approached the group of officials. His weathered hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I've been watching this whole thing from the beginning," he said. "That little girl didn't just free the cub, she talked to it. They understood each other somehow." Officer Martinez looked skeptical, but Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. She had seen stranger things in her years working with wildlife, and the behavior of both bears was unlike anything in her textbooks. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "Let the little girl help," Mr. Peterson said. "The mama bear trusts her. Look how calm she is when the child is near her baby." It was true. Every time Zara moved closer to the bear cub, the mother bear's posture relaxed slightly. When other adults approached, her muscles tensed and her ears flattened, but the toddler seemed to have some kind of calming effect on the massive animal. Nina overheard the conversation and felt her stomach drop. "You want to use my daughter as bait?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "Not as bait," Dr. Kim said carefully. "As a translator, animals, especially young ones, respond to certain types of energy. Your daughter has something that's keeping this situation peaceful." Before anyone could stop her, Zara had found the entrance to the butterfly dome. The mesh door was secured with a simple latch that she couldn't quite reach, but her attempts to open it were clear to everyone watching. The bear cub moved to the door from inside, standing on its hind legs and pawing at the latch from its side. The two young creatures were working together again, trying to figure out how to remove the final barrier between them. The mother bear watched this interaction with what could only be described as approval. She settled into a sitting position, still alert but no longer defensive. It was as if she had decided that the human cub was safe to be around her own baby. Dr. Kim made a decision that would haunt her for years to come, regardless of how it turned out. She approached Nina with a proposal that went against every protocol in her professional handbook. "I think we should let them meet," she said quietly, "properly, without the barrier." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the gathered adults thought they knew about wild animals and human safety. But as they watched Zara and the bear cub continue their attempts to reach each other, it became clear that some force larger than human understanding was at work. Nina looked at her daughter, then at the massive mother bear who had appointed herself guardian of the situation. Every maternal instinct she possessed screamed against what Dr. Kim was suggesting, but something deeper, some primitive wisdom that connected her to the bear mother, whispered that this was exactly what needed to happen. "If anything goes wrong," Nina said, her voice barely audible. "If that bear so much as breathes wrong near my daughter, I'll put her down instantly," Dr. Kim promised, though she prayed it wouldn't come to that. Officer Martinez stepped forward with the key to situations like this, a simple tool that could change everything. He carried bolt cutters in his patrol car for emergencies, and this certainly qualified, but using them would mean crossing a line from observer to participant in whatever was unfolding. The crowd of neighbors had grown as word spread through the small community. People emerged from houses several blocks away, drawn by the commotion and the impossible stories being shared through hasty phone calls. Social media was already buzzing with blurry photos and incredible claims about a toddler befriending a family of wild bears. Tommy Martinez, the newspaper delivery boy, had abandoned his route entirely. At 12 years old, he was closer to Zara's age than any of the adults, and he found himself strangely unafraid of the bears. He approached Officer Martinez with a confidence that surprised everyone. "Sir," he said, "I think I know what's happening here." The officer looked down at the boy, recognizing him as the son of Maria Martinez, who lived 3 streets over. "What's that, Tommy?" "My abuela. She used to tell stories about people who could talk to animals. She said some people are born with a gift that they can understand what animals are feeling." Tommy pointed toward Zara, who was now sitting cross-legged in front of the butterfly dome, chattering away to the bear cub in her baby language. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Dr. Kim said, though her scientific training rebelled against the notion of mystical connections between humans and wildlife. But as she watched Zara and the bear cub continue their impossible conversation, she began to wonder if there might be more truth to old stories than modern science was willing to admit. The mother bear had moved closer to the dome, her massive body now only 3 feet from where Zara sat. Any sudden movement from the crowd could trigger a defensive response that would end in tragedy. Yet somehow, the presence of the tiny human girl seemed to create a bubble of peace around the entire scene. Dr. Kim found herself thinking about her own daughter, safely at home with her husband. Would she be brave enough to let her child participate in something like this? The maternal bond between the bear and her cub was so strong it was almost visible, a fierce love that transcended species barriers. "All right," she said finally, making a decision that would either be remembered as brilliant or catastrophic. "Officer Martinez, get those bolt cutters, but we do this slowly, and at the first sign of aggression from either bear, we shut it down." Nina felt her knees go weak. She was about to allow her 18-month-old daughter to enter an enclosed space with a wild animal, supervised by a mother bear that could kill them all in seconds. Yet, somehow, watching Zara's absolute fearlessness and the gentle way both bears responded to her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The crowd fell silent as Officer Martinez returned with the bolt cutters. Every person present understood they were about to witness something that would change them forever, one way or another. Phones were raised, cameras focused, and hearts hammered as the officer approached the butterfly dome. The moment of truth had arrived. In seconds, there would be nothing but trust and hope standing between a human toddler and 2 wild bears. The whole world seemed to hold its breath as Officer Martinez positioned the bolt cutters on the first section of the dome's entrance. But just as he was about to cut, something extraordinary happened that no one could have predicted. The bear cub, seeing the tool in the officer's hands, began to bark excitedly, not in fear or aggression, but in what sounded remarkably like encouragement. The mother bear responded with her own rumbling call, and suddenly both bears were making sounds that seemed almost conversational. They were talking to each other, and somehow, impossibly, little Zara seemed to understand every word. Zara tilted her head to one side, listening intently to the bear sounds with the focused attention of a translator at the United Nations. Her tiny brow furrowed in concentration, and then she began making soft clicking noises with her tongue, sounds that no human baby should have been able to produce. The effect on the bears was immediate and startling. Both mother and cub stopped their vocalizations and stared at Zara with what could only be described as surprise. The little girl had somehow responded to them in their own language, creating a three-way conversation that defied everything the watching adults thought they knew about communication. Dr. Kim's hands trembled as she lowered her tranquilizer gun. In all her years of wildlife study, she had never witnessed anything remotely similar to what was happening before her eyes. Animals communicated with humans through body language and simple conditioning, not through actual linguistic exchange. "Did she just," Officer Martinez began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Talk to them?" "Yeah, I think she did," whispered Mrs. Chen, who had crept closer despite the danger. Nina felt the world tilt around her. Her daughter was 18 months old. She barely spoke 10 words of English, and most of those were simple mama papa bye-bye baby talk. Yet here she was, apparently conducting a sophisticated dialogue with 2 wild bears, using sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her genetic memory. The bear cub pressed its face against the netting again, this time making soft whimpering sounds directed specifically at Zara. The little girl responded immediately, crawling closer to the dome and placing both hands flat against the mesh where the cub's paws were pressed from the inside. "Help," Zara said suddenly, her voice clear and certain. It was one of her clearest words, but the way she said it carried weight beyond her years. She wasn't asking for help, she was translating what the cub had told her. The mother bear took several steps closer, her massive form now less than 2 feet from where Zara sat. Instead of menacing, her presence felt protective, as if she had appointed herself as guardian of this extraordinary communication. Tommy Martinez stepped forward from the crowd, his young eyes bright with wonder. "She's like those people in the old stories," he said to his delivery supervisor, who had come looking for him when he failed to complete his route. "The ones who could understand animal speech." "That's just folklore, son," the man replied, but his voice lacked conviction as he watched the impossible scene unfold. Dr. Kim made the decision that would define the rest of her career. She approached Officer Martinez and spoke in a voice that carried complete authority despite its quietness. "Cut the entrance," she said. "But do it slowly, and everyone needs to step back except for Nina. The mother needs to see that we trust her with our most precious thing." The crowd began to move backward, creating a larger circle around the butterfly dome. Phones continued recording, but people were no longer just capturing a viral video. They were documenting what felt like a moment of genuine magic, something that would be talked about for generations in their small community. Officer Martinez positioned the bolt cutters on the first wire of the dome's entrance. The metal gave way with a sharp snap that made several people flinch, but the bears showed no sign of alarm. If anything, they seemed to be waiting expectantly for the barrier to be removed. With each cut, the tension in the air grew thicker. Nina found herself holding her breath as her daughter remained perfectly calm, continuing her soft conversation with the bear cub. The sounds Zara was making grew more complex, involving trills and guttural noises that seemed impossible for human vocal cords to produce. The entrance to the butterfly dome finally swung open with a gentle creak. For the first time since its accidental imprisonment, the bear cub was free to leave its netted prison. But instead of running toward its mother or fleeing into the forest, it did something that brought tears to every watching eye. The cub slowly approached Zara, moving with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a precious and fragile treasure. When it reached the entrance of the dome, it stopped and sat down, waiting for permission to come closer to the human child. Zara looked up at the massive mother bear as if asking for approval. The mother rumbled softly, a sound that seemed to carry consent and blessing. Only then did Zara extend her tiny hand toward the bear cub. The moment their skin and fur made contact, something shifted in the air around them. It was subtle, like the change in atmospheric pressure before a storm, but everyone present felt it. The connection between child and cub became visible, a bond that transcended the boundaries between species. The bear cub gently licked Zara's palm with its rough tongue, causing her to giggle with delight. She stroked its furry head with the natural confidence of someone who had been handling wild animals all her life. The mother bear watched this interaction with what appeared to be approval, even pleasure. But the peaceful moment was interrupted by an arrival no one had expected. A white van pulled up to the curb with Channel 7 News emblazoned on its side. Somewhere in the chain of phone calls and social media posts, word had reached the local television station. Reporter Jessica Brooks jumped out of the van with her cameraman close behind, both of them moving with the urgency of journalists who knew they were racing against time to capture a breaking story. When Jessica saw the scene in the backyard, she stopped so abruptly that her cameraman nearly collided with her. "Are you getting this?" she whispered to her companion, who already had his camera rolling. The arrival of the news crew created a ripple of excitement through the crowd of neighbors, but it also introduced a new element of unpredictability. The bears had grown accustomed to the small group of local residents, but strangers arriving with large equipment might trigger their natural wariness. Dr. Kim immediately approached the news crew with her hands raised in a calming gesture. "You need to stay back," she said firmly. "This situation is extremely delicate." Jessica Brooks had covered thousands of stories in her 15-year career, from political scandals to natural disasters, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing. A human toddler was sitting cross-legged on the grass, petting a wild bear cub while its mother stood guard nearby. It looked like something from a fairy tale rather than a news story. "How long has this been going on?" she asked Dr. Kim in a hushed voice. "About an hour, Doctor," Kim replied. "And it started when the little girl freed the cub from the butterfly dome netting." The cameraman zoomed in on Zara and the bear cub, capturing the gentle way they interacted. The little girl was now attempting to braid wildflowers into the cub's fur, a task that required the animal to remain perfectly still. Incredibly, the young bear seemed to understand what she was doing and cooperated completely. The mother bear had settled into a lying position, her massive head resting on her paws as she watched the play between her cub and the human child. Her eyes tracked every movement, but her body language suggested contentment rather than concern. More vehicles were arriving now as word continued to spread. A second news van appeared, followed by several cars carrying people from neighboring towns who had heard about the extraordinary event on social media. The quiet residential street was becoming congested with curiosity seekers and media personnel. Nina felt overwhelmed by the growing crowd and attention. What had started as a private moment between her daughter and a wild animal was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. She approached Dr. Kim with growing concern. "This is getting out of hand," she said. "There are too many people. What if it scares the bears?" Dr. Kim nodded grimly. She had been thinking the same thing. The mother bear was beginning to show signs of stress as more strangers arrived. Her ears were flattening slightly, and she had lifted her head from her paws to scan the growing crowd. "We need to start thinking about how to end this safely," Dr. Kim said, "before the situation becomes unmanageable." But ending it safely was easier said than done. Zara and the bear cub had formed a connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute. The little girl was now lying on her side next to the cub, both of them appearing to nap together in the morning sunshine. The image was so peaceful and natural that it was hard to remember they belonged to different species. Officer Martinez received a radio call informing him that animal control from 3 neighboring counties was en route, along with representatives from the state wildlife department. What had started as a simple neighborhood incident was becoming an interagency situation that would require careful coordination. "How do we separate them?" he asked Doctor Kim quietly. "The kid doesn't seem to want to leave the bear, and the bear doesn't want to leave the kid." It was true. Every time an adult approached to try to coax Zara away from the bear cub, both child and animal would move closer together, as if protecting each other from unwanted interference. The mother bear would also become more alert during these attempts, clearly ready to defend both young creatures if necessary. Dr. Kim found herself facing a problem that wasn't covered in any wildlife management manual. How do you handle a situation where a wild animal has bonded with a human child so completely that separating them might cause psychological trauma to both parties? The answer came from an unexpected source. Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest from St. Catherine's Church 3 blocks away, had walked over to see what was causing such a commotion in his neighborhood. When he saw the scene in the Brooks' backyard, he crossed himself and whispered a prayer in Spanish. "Padre," called out Maria Martinez, Tommy's mother. "What do you think this means?" Father Santos had served his community for 47 years, offering comfort and guidance through every conceivable human crisis. But he had never encountered anything quite like this. Yet, as he watched the peaceful interaction between child and cub, something in his theological training stirred. "Sometimes," he said in his accented English, "God shows us his love through the innocence of children and the trust of his creatures. This little girl has no fear because she has no hate. The bears sense this purity." His words carried weight in the largely Catholic neighborhood, and several people crossed themselves as they contemplated the possibility that they were witnessing something divine rather than merely unusual. But divine or not, the practical problems remained. The crowd was growing larger and more restless. News crews from 2 additional television stations had arrived, and social media was exploding with videos and photos of the bear girl of Willowbrook. The hashtag #BearGirl was already trending locally, and national news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Dr. Sarah Kim realized that within hours, their quiet neighborhood would be invaded by animal rights activists, curious tourists, and media personnel from around the country. The peaceful interaction between Zara and the bears would be lost in a circus of public attention and competing agendas. She made a decision that would require her to balance her professional responsibilities with her growing conviction that something truly special was happening here. "We need to move them," she told Nina and Officer Martinez, "all of them. Somewhere safe where this can continue without turning into a zoo." "Move them where?" Nina asked. "And how do you move a family of wild bears?" The answer to that question would come from someone none of them expected, and it would set in motion events that would change not only Zara's life, but the way the entire world thought about the relationship between humans and wildlife. As if summoned by their desperate need for a solution, a dusty pickup truck pulled up behind the news vans. The driver who emerged was a woman in her 60s, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her weathered hands spoke of a lifetime working outdoors. "Heard on the scanner about a bear situation," she said, approaching Dr. Kim with the confident stride of someone accustomed to taking charge. "Name's Ruth Patterson. I run the Mountain View Wildlife Sanctuary about 30 miles north of here." Dr. Kim felt a surge of relief. Ruth Patterson was legendary in wildlife management circles, a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for orphaned and injured wild animals. If anyone could help them navigate this unprecedented situation, it would be her. "Ruth, thank God you're here," Dr. Kim said. "I don't suppose you've ever dealt with anything like this before." Ruth looked across the yard at Zara and the bear cub, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a game of peekaboo, with the cub covering its eyes with its paws while Zara giggled behind her hands. The sight was so endearing that even the hardened wildlife expert felt her heart melt. "Can't say I have," Ruth admitted. "But I've got 40 years of experience with bears, and I can tell you one thing for certain, that Mama Bear has adopted that little girl as a part of her family. Look at her body language. She's treating the child like one of her own cubs." This observation sent a chill through every adult present. If the mother bear truly saw Zara as her adopted cub, she would defend the child with the same fierce protection she showed her biological offspring. Any attempt to separate them could trigger a violent defensive response. "So, what do we do?" Officer Martinez asked. Ruth studied the scene for several long minutes, her experienced eye taking in details that others had missed. The way the mother bear positioned herself to keep both young ones in her line of sight, the protective semicircle she had created with her body, the relaxed but alert posture that suggested a parent supervising safe play rather than a wild animal tolerating human presence. "We follow their lead," she said finally, "and we pray that little girl's mama has more courage than sense, because what I'm about to suggest is going to sound completely crazy." Ruth Patterson had seen many impossible things in her 4 decades of wildlife work, but nothing quite like this. She watched as Zara continued playing with the bear cub, their interaction so natural it defied every law of nature she thought she understood. The mother bear's protective stance over both young ones told her everything she needed to know about what was really happening here. "That mother bear has claimed your daughter," Ruth said quietly to Nina. In her mind, Zara is her cub now. Trying to separate them could be dangerous for everyone. Nina felt her knees weaken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't separate them," Ruth replied, her weathered face serious. "We move them all together to my sanctuary, where they can figure this out safely, away from all this chaos." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything civilized society believed about the boundaries between human and wild. Dr. Kim stared at Ruth as if she had suggested they all sprout wings and fly. "You want to take a human child to live with wild bears?" Dr. Kim asked incredulously. "I want to give them space to be what they apparently already are," Ruth corrected. "A family." Officer Martinez shook his head vigorously. "That's not possible. Child Services would never allow it, the liability alone." But Nina found herself looking at her daughter, really looking at her for the first time since this impossible morning had begun. Zara was lying on her side next to the bear cub, both of them drowsing in the warm sunshine. The mother bear had moved closer, creating a protective triangle around both young ones. It was the most peaceful scene Nina had ever witnessed. "How long?" Nina asked quietly. "What?" Ruth replied. "How long would they need to stay together?" "Until the cub is old enough to be independent?" Ruth nodded slowly. "Maybe 6 months, maybe longer. Bears mature slowly, and this bond—" She gestured toward the sleeping pair. "This is something I've never seen before. It might take time to understand what it means." The crowd had grown quieter as Ruth spoke, everyone straining to hear this conversation that would determine the fate of the extraordinary family that had formed in their midst. News cameras captured every word, though none of the reporters fully understood the magnitude of what was being discussed. Nina knelt down beside her daughter and the bear cub. Both opened their eyes at her approach, Zara reaching up with chubby arms while the cub nuzzled against her side. The mother bear watched this interaction with alert but calm eyes. "Mama," Zara said clearly, one of her favorite words. But then she did something that made Nina's heart skip. She pointed to the mother bear and said, "Mama," again, then pointed back to Nina and repeated the word a third time. In her innocent, 18-month-old way, Zara was explaining that she now had two mothers. The revelation hit Nina like a physical blow, but instead of pain, she felt an overwhelming surge of love and pride. Her daughter had done something impossible, something beautiful, something that would change both their lives forever. "Okay," Nina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Okay, we'll try." Ruth smiled for the first time since arriving. "My sanctuary has a cabin, small but comfortable. You and Zara can stay there while the bears have the run of the 50-acre preserve. They'll be safe, and so will she." Dr. Kim began to object, citing regulations and protocols, but Officer Martinez placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the right thing isn't the same as the legal thing. We'll figure out the paperwork later." The logistics were complicated and would take hours to arrange, but the decision had been made. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, plans were set in motion to transport the most unusual family in history to a place where they could explore their impossible bond without the pressure of crowds and cameras. Father Santos approached Nina as the preparations began. "Mija," he said gently, "sometimes God asks us to do things that seem crazy to the world, but love always looks crazy to those who don't understand it." The old priest's words stayed with Nina as she watched her daughter say goodbye to the neighbors who had witnessed their miracle. Zara waved her tiny hand at each person, babbling in her mixture of English and the strange bear sounds she had somehow learned to make. The bear cub stayed close to Zara throughout the preparations, as if sensing that another change was coming. The mother bear remained watchful but calm, seemingly understanding that these humans were helping rather than threatening her unusual family. As Ruth's specially modified trailer arrived to transport the bears, and Nina packed a bag for what might be a very long journey, the neighborhood fell into a respectful quiet. People lined the streets, not to gawk or take pictures, but to bear witness to something sacred. Tommy Martinez, the young newspaper delivery boy, would later write in his school essay that he had seen a miracle that day. Not the kind with angels and bright lights, but the quiet kind that happens when love breaks down the walls between different worlds. The loading of the bears went smoothly, with Zara helping to coax the cub into the trailer by climbing in first herself. The mother bear followed her adopted human daughter without hesitation, settling down beside both young ones for the journey ahead. As the convoy prepared to leave, Ruth's truck pulling the trailer with the bear family, followed by Nina's car with official escorts, the crowd gathered one last time. Instead of cheering or calling out, they stood in silence, hands over hearts, as if watching a funeral procession for the old world they had known. 6 months later, the Mountain View Wildlife Sanctuary received its first official visitors since the arrival of the Brooks Bear family. Dr. Kim, Officer Martinez, and several of the neighbors made the drive north to see how their miracle was progressing. What they found exceeded their wildest dreams. Zara, now 2 years old, and speaking in full sentences, moved through the forest with the grace of someone who had learned to walk among wild creatures. The bear cub, nearly full-grown now, remained her constant companion and protector. But the most remarkable sight was Nina, who had discovered a gift she never knew she possessed. Working alongside Ruth, she had become a bridge between the human and animal worlds, helping other orphaned wildlife find their place in a sanctuary that had become famous worldwide as a place where impossible things happened every day. The mother bear had claimed her own section of the preserve but visited daily, checking on her adopted human cub with the same devotion she showed her biological offspring. The family structure was unlike anything in nature documentaries, yet it worked with a harmony that spoke to something deeper than instinct. As the visitors prepared to leave that evening, Zara ran up to each of them with her bear companion at her side. She was no longer the babbling toddler they remembered, but a confident child who moved between two worlds with ease. "Thank you," she said clearly, words that carried the weight of gratitude from an entire impossible family. Officer Martinez knelt down to her level, his eyes moist with emotion. "Thank you, little one. You taught us that love doesn't have boundaries." As the sun set over the Mountain View Wildlife Sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a human child and a young bear played in a meadow, while their two mothers, one human, one bear, watched with pride and contentment. The story of the bear girl of Willowbrook had ended, but the legend of Zara Brooks, the child who spoke to animals and broke down the walls between species, was just beginning. In the years that followed, the sanctuary would become a pilgrimage site for those seeking proof that miracles still happen in a world that often forgets the power of innocent love. And at the heart of it all, a family that shouldn't have existed continued to thrive, proving that sometimes the most impossible things are the most true. The morning that began with a trapped bear cub and a curious toddler had become a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that form when hearts recognize each other across the vast divide of species and circumstance. In the end, love had indeed conquered all, not through force or demand, but through the gentle persistence of a child who saw no difference between herself and a creature in need, and the community that had the wisdom to trust in something larger than their own understanding.